of large audiences. I believe I read somewhere that you were featured in the most heavily watched Bill Mahr video clip of all time. Do you know if that statistic is accurate?
I suspect it still is accurate. It was at the time. I mean, it was the most viral thing that ever got exported from the show.
And you were discussing Islamophobia with the then future Batman.
Yeah.
And why do you suppose that clip became so widespread? I mean, Bill Maher is no stranger to controversy. The exchange between you and Ben Affleck and between Maher and Ben Affleck did become quite heated. But in any given month, there are many interactions on cable news and on Sunday talk shows that are at least as lively. What do you think it was about that made it go so widespread? And also, if you characterized it, if you care to just characterize it briefly for those who haven't seen it.
It was a combination of things. It was the topic. It was the fact that it was a star of Ben Affleck's caliber going kind of nuts, and going nuts in a way that was very polarizing to the audience. So what happened briefly is I was actually on not to talk about Islam or jihadism or terrorism or anything related to this topic. I was on to talk about my book on meditation, Waking Up, where I was trying to put our spiritual concerns, our contemplative concerns on a rational footing. And it just so happened that, I mean, this is a hobby horse that Bill and I have ridden for a number of years, talking about the unique need for reform in Islam. I have an argument against all faith-based religion, but part of my argument is to acknowledge that religions are not the same. They teach different things. They emphasize different points. And to its discredit and to the reliable immiseration of millions of people, Islam emphasizes intolerance to free speech and intolerance to political equality between the sexes, and a rather direct connection between suicidal violence and martyrdom, and hence all the problems we see throughout the Muslim world at the moment and our collision with it. So in any case, that topic came up of Islam and jihadism in the middle of this interview, and Ben Affleck jumped in. I mean, clearly he had been prepared by somebody to hate me, because his intrusions into my interview with Bill were otherwise inexplicable, because he was sort of at my throat even before the topic of Islam came up. I was still talking about meditation, and he said something snide again in a mid-show interview that is normally protected from the intrusions of the rest of the panel. So it was weird, and then the thing just lit up with him seemingly completely misunderstanding what Bill and I were saying, but doing it in an increasingly adamant and ultimately quite heated way. So he was unhinged and not making any sense from my point of view. And he was calling us racists and bigots. And
in some ways proving the very points that you were making.
Oh, yeah, in every way.
Yeah.
My point was, listen, people get emotionally hijacked on this issue. They don't actually follow the logic of what is being said. I'm criticizing ideas, not people. Islam is a religion subscribed to one or another degree by people who call themselves Muslims, but we have to speak specifically about the consequences of specific beliefs. It becomes incredibly relevant to know what percentage of people think dying in defense of the faith is the best thing that could possibly happen to you, or that apostates should be killed, right? So we're talking about the consequences of ideas. And there are many, many millions of Muslims who would repudiate both of those ideas. So obviously I'm not talking about them when I'm talking about the problem of jihadism or a belief in martyrdom or apostasy. And so he proved himself totally incapable of following the plot, just as I was talking about that very problem, and went berserk. And the most depressing thing about that encounter was to see how many people on the left, and in particular apologists for Islam and so-called moderate Muslims, who viewed his performance as just the height of ethical wisdom, right? Like he had unmasked my and Bill's racism, as though being Muslim was to be a member of a race. I mean, that non sequitur was the first thing people should have noticed. But he was celebrated as just this white knight who came to the defense of beleaguered brown people everywhere, right?
Really? I missed that part of the...
To a degree that is just, I mean, if you looked on social media in the immediate aftermath of that, it was just a tsunami of moral and political confusion, really. It was like a nuclear bomb of identity politics.
Well, what's interesting to me is I looked at that in preparation for today's